Imagine you're an Imperial Guard commander. You've been bombarding a city block for like 3 straight weeks.
Oh, yeah. Just relentless artillery.
Right, exactly. The artillery has turned the architecture to absolute dust. It's just rubble at this point.
Nothing left but craters.
Yeah. So you finally order the charge, you send thousands of your troops screaming over the ruins, and you are completely expecting to find shattered morale, panic, corpses everywhere.
It's a logical conclusion to a 3-week bombardment, right?
Exactly. But instead, the dust clears, and you see a perfectly aligned, unbroken wall of bright orange and blue-gray armor, and they haven't moved an inch.
Which is just chilling.
They aren't screaming back at you. They are just standing in the ruins perfectly still,
Yeah.
and they are already aiming right at your center mass.
It is, it is honestly the most terrifying thing you can encounter in a galaxy that is essentially built on noise.
Oh, absolutely. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're putting you right on the front lines of one of the most fascinating and, frankly, uniquely terrifying factions in the entire Tau Empire. We are talking about the Sept.
The immovable object.
Right. If you follow the lore, you know the universe is a landscape of absolute unfiltered chaos. You've got, corn berserkers charging across blasted wastelands.
Tyrannid swarms blotting out the sun.
Yeah, orcs just roaring right in your face.
Yeah.
The standard expectation in this setting is that the scariest thing out there is, well, the loudest thing.
Which is exactly why the Sept breaks every psychological rule of engagement. The mission for our deep dive today, going through all these lore excerpts and history texts, is to unpack how a specific set of extreme, unrelenting environmental pressures basically forged a military culture of absolute unbreakable discipline.
Because they really are unbroken.
They are. We're going to explore how they operate, how they build their worlds, and critically, why their signature strategy, the doctrine of the patient hunter, is considered the ultimate horror in a setting that's already, packed to the brim with nightmares.
Yeah, if you take nothing else away from this deep dive, I want you to keep this image in your head. The Sept is an immovable object existing in a universe populated entirely by unstoppable forces.
That's a great way to frame it.
Like everything else in the galaxy is trying to crash over them, like this tidal wave of blood and noise. And the Sept are the breakwater. They are this stoic defense standing against an entire cosmos of aggressive offense.
But you don't just wake up one day and decide to be the breakwater, right?
Right, you have to be forged into it. And to understand how a Sept fire warrior can stand perfectly still while a horde of screaming zealots charges them, we have to go back to the Crucible where this entire society was born.
You really have to look at the first sphere of expansion. When the Tau were first reaching out into the stars to claim new worlds, they didn't have the luxury of picking only the pristine, welcoming garden planets.
They weren't exactly picky.
Not at all. The settling of Sacia was an absolute bloodbath. It was an environment that demanded a hyper-militarized response just to exist for another 24 hours. It was brutal necessity.
Let's paint the picture of this early world for a second. Put yourself on those first colonization ships. You break through the atmosphere, you deploy the landing ramps, and you aren't greeted by fertile soil and a gentle breeze.
No, you are immediately stepping into a meat grinder.
Literally. The planet's ecosystem was entirely dominated by hyper-aggressive, flesh-eating predators. And we aren't talking about, like, a few wolves in the woods.
No, we are talking about an apex predator population so dense and so lethal that it blanketed the entire planet.
Yeah, so before a single Earth-caste engineer could pour a foundation, before a water-caste diplomat could even speak a word, the Fire-caste had to systematically exterminate these monsters just to carve out a literal foothold.
It was pest control on a planetary scale. But the pests were these towering, armored, flesh-eating beasts that essentially viewed the incoming Tau as an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Right.
So this wasn't a war of ideology, it was a war of fundamental biological survival.
And this is where I have to stop and push back on the entire premise of the Tau expansion here. Based on the sources we're looking at, it just seems crazy.
How so?
Well, space is, for all intents and purposes, infinite. You have a hyper-advanced spacefaring civilization. If you warp into a system, drop out of orbit, and realize the planet below you is a literal death world covered in monsters actively trying to eat you, why on earth do you stay?
It's a fair question.
Right. Why not just close the landing ramp, fire up the engines, and find a nice, quiet, uninhabited rock like 3 systems over? Committing to a planetary war of extermination against local fauna just to set up a colony makes zero logistical sense.
Tactically, in isolation, you might be right. I mean, any normal general would probably cut their losses.
Exactly.
But you are ignoring the core philosophy that drives the entire Tao species, which is the greater good.
Okay, right.
The concept of the greater good doesn't allow for retreat just because the geometry of the problem is bloody. Expansion is a mandate. Once the ethereals designated Sasia as a Sept world, abandoning it would have been a philosophical failure.
And to the Tau, philosophical failure is unacceptable.
Way worse than a military casualty, yeah.
So they basically just threw bodies at the monsters until the monsters ran out of teeth.
Well, they applied disciplined, systematic eradication, but you are touching on the exact mechanism that shaped them. The cost of that mandate was generational trauma.
That makes sense.
Survival on early Sasia demanded a level of vigilance that completely rewired their society. Think about the psychological toll on those early fire warriors.
It must have been unbearable.
If a sentry falls asleep on a normal world, maybe a piece of equipment gets stolen. If a sentry falls asleep on early Sasia, a pack of flesh-eating predators breaches the perimeter and slaughters an entire habitation block.
There is zero margin for error, like absolute zero.
Exactly zero. If a patrol broke formation out in the wilderness, they didn't just get reprimanded, they were eaten alive.
Wow.
So discipline ceased to be a military regulation, you know? It became the literal barrier between life and violent death.
And when you live under that kind of pressure cooker for generations, it doesn't just stay in the military academies.
No, it infiltrates everything.
Right? It bleeds into the civilian population. It bleeds into the architecture. I mean, you don't fight a planetary war against monsters without it completely dictating how you build your civilization going forward. Which brings us to what Sasia actually looks like today in the lore.
Right, because the monsters might be gone, but the paranoia and that demand for absolute security built the physical world they live in right now.
And that physical reality is incredibly stark. Like Sasia today is this hot, sweltering planet. It's incredibly densely populated. But if you look at the surface, you aren't going to see sprawling open-air metropolises.
Yeah, definitely not.
You aren't going to see suburbs or rolling highways. The entire population is contained within a vast interconnected network of domed cities and heavily fortified agriplexes.
Yeah, and if you want to visualize this, don't think of a normal city. Think of a hyper-optimized nuclear submarine, but scaled up to house billions of people.
That is such a good analogy. Have you ever been on a submarine?
I have, actually, yeah. It's tight.
It's so cramped. If you've been on one, you know that space is the most valuable commodity in existence. Every square inch serves a function.
Every single person on board has a critical role.
Yeah.
And if one person fails to maintain their specific system, the entire vessel implodes.
That is Sasia to a T.
The submarine analogy is the perfect lens for this. And the Earthcast, you know, the engineers and builders of the Tau, they took that concept of hyper-optimization and built downward.
Right, because the surface is too hostile.
Exactly. The domes on the surface are really just the capstone. Beneath the crust of the planet, there is a staggering labyrinth of Earthcast facilities. We're talking massive subterranean factories, energy grids, logistical hubs, all operating in these hyper-efficient layers.
Now, when you hear the phrase hyper-dense, multi-layered subterranean city, your brain immediately jumps to the Imperium.
Oh, for sure. Hive cities.
Right. If you know the lore, you know about hive cities. A hive city is a nightmare. It's this towering, layered metal tomb where trillions of humans live in absolute squalor. They're breathing toxic smog, eating recycled corpse starch, and dying of industrial runoff before they even hit 30.
It's the worst place imaginable to live.
But the sources explicitly contrast Sasia against those hellish hives. The lore states that despite living in these incredibly dense, Spartan, artificial environments, the population of Sasia is, quote, happy and healthy.
Which is a really profound statement on the psychology of the Tau, and specifically this Sept.
But I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. I have to call out what sounds like straight-up watercast propaganda.
You think it's fake?
Well, how do you pack billions of people into sealed terrariums on a sweltering rock, give them a Spartan existence where they have to work relentlessly just to keep the air scrubbers running, and call them happy?
I mean, they are physiologically different.
But humans go crazy if they don't see the sun for a few days. Living in a planetary sardine does not produce a healthy society.
Where?
It produces a pressure cooker of resentment.
See, it produces resentment if you view it through the lens of human individualism.
Okay.
You are projecting the human desire for wide open spaces and personal freedom onto an alien culture that biologically and culturally rejects individualism. You have to strip away your human bias to understand them.
Okay, walk me through the alien psychology then. Why aren't they miserable?
Because for a citizen of Sasia, their historical context completely defines their baseline for happiness. Remember the flesh-eating predators we just talked about?
Hard to forget.
Right. Safety and survival on this world have always come from everyone executing their specific duty perfectly. They do not view their Spartan, tightly controlled dome existence as a prison.
They don't.
Not at all. They view it as the ultimate triumph of the greater good over a hostile universe. When an Earthcast engineer spends 18 hours a day maintaining a subterranean atmospheric seal, they aren't, lamenting their lack of free time.
Like a human would.
Exactly. They are experiencing deep, profound fulfillment because that seal keeps the entire city alive.
So duty literally equals contentment for them.
Absolutely. The smooth operation of the collective is the highest form of joy they can possibly experience. The hydroponic farms working at maximum yield, the dome shields humming perfectly, that is security.
And to a society forged in a meat grinder, perfect security is utopia.
Bingo. They don't want to wander out into the sweltering desert and find themselves. They want to be the perfect gear and the perfect machine.
That is so alien. It really is. It's a society where nobody aspires to be the main character.
Yep.
And when you realize that every single person on this planet is born, raised, and educated in these densely packed, perfectly ordered, artificial dome environments, you start to understand why their military operates the way it does.
But it completely shapes them.
You cannot separate the architecture of the city from the mind of the soldier. The dome creates the fire warrior.
Which brings us to the infantry. The fire caste of Sasia is the undisputed bastion of their society.
It's highly militarized, even by TAS standards.
Yeah,
right?
very much so.
Because Sasia hosts the Kirkwath Auxiliary Academy, which is legendary in the lore, and they boast one of the highest proportions of fire warriors across the entire empire. They're just churning out disciplined soldiers on a massive industrial scale.
Constantly.
But this is another point where the math doesn't seem to add up for me when looking at these excerpts.
Why is that?
Well, if a civilization is churning out massive, sprawling armies, historical precedent, whether human or alien, tells us they're gearing up for conquest.
True.
You build a massive hammer because you want to smash your neighbors.
Yeah.
You want to expand aggressively. Yet Sasia's reputation in the text is the exact opposite. They're described as honorable, steadfast, and critically not flashy or impetuous.
Right. They aren't hotheads.
So how do you reconcile a society that arms itself to the teeth, but completely rejects aggressive offensive warfare? Why build an ocean of soldiers just to stand still?
Because of where those soldiers are expected to fight.
Okay.
They aren't building an army to charge across open plains or drop pod into enemy fortresses. They are building an army specifically to hold urban environments. And to understand how they do that, you have to look at the Kirkwath Academy and how they actually train.
Right, let's talk about the training, because the source material makes it sound completely grueling.
It is entirely built around the reality of the dome. In those massive underground Earthcast facilities we mentioned earlier, they have dedicated immense subterranean caverns purely to combat simulation.
Okay.
But they aren't just setting up like firing ranges or basic obstacle courses. They are building massive, painstakingly accurate one-to-one architectural replicas of alien cities.
Wait, really? So deep underground, they are constructing fake imperial hive sectors and orc shanty towns.
Exactly.
That is insane.
The Watercast gathers the intelligence, the Earthcast builds the physical replica, and the Firecast spends years fighting in it. They study the choke points of an imperial cathedral.
Oh.
They analyze the structural weaknesses of an orc fortress. They map out the sight lines, the avenues of approach, and the verticality of enemy urban sprawl. And then they run live fire simulations in those artificial cities until the geometry of the battlefield is just burned into their muscle memory.
I mean, if you know anything about military history, you know that urban combat city fighting is universally considered the absolute worst form of warfare.
Oh, it's a meat grinder.
It is a nightmare. It's close quarters, you are breaching rooms, you don't know what's behind a door. Attacks come from the sewers, from the rooftops, right through the drywall.
Yeah, the casualty rates are always catastrophic.
Because it is pure, unpredictable chaos. But you're telling me the Sasi are spending their entire lives practicing this specific chaos in simulated environments.
They are mastering the chaos. They are turning the unpredictable nature of urban warfare into a mathematical equation that they have already solved before they even deploy.
That's brilliant.
Think about the psychological advantage this gives a Sasiya strike team. When they deploy to defend an alien city or even to occupy one, they don't experience the disorientation that usually comes with urban combat.
Because they've already fought in that city 1,000 times underground.
Precisely. They have entirely removed the element of surprise. The physical concrete might belong to the Imperium, but the tactical geometry of the war zone belongs to Sasiya. As you mentioned in the intro, when the enemy commander charges a city block, they think they are dictating the flow of the battle. But the Sasi Fire Warriors have already mapped the kill zones.
I know exactly where you're going to hide.
They already know exactly which piles of rubble the enemy will instinctively dive behind for cover, and they already have overlapping fields of fire zeroed in on those exact spots. They are fighting in their own backyard regardless of whose planet they are actually on.
That is surgically lethal. And this simulated mastery is what allows them to execute their core battlefield doctrine.
Yes.
We've touched on it, but now we really need to dig into the absolute meat of how the Sasiya fight. We need to talk about Cayenne, the patient hunter.
Cayenne is the defining philosophy of the Sasiya military. It is one of the two primary tactical doctrines of the Tau Empire, the other being Manka, the killing blow.
Right. Monka's the fast one.
Exactly. While Manka is about a rapid, decapitating strike, Cayenne is about utilizing extreme, almost agonizing patience. It is the complete and utter rejection of the impetuous charge.
I want to frame Cayenne for you, the listener, in a way that makes the sheer psychological weight of it clear. Think of modern infantry tactics, specifically an L-shaped ambush.
A classic.
Right. You set your troops up in a hidden L formation, you use a small force to draw the enemy into the center, and then you obliterate them with crossfire. Now, take that concept and scale it up to a planetary level.
It's massive.
Imagine playing a grandmaster in chess. But the grandmaster isn't aggressively moving pieces to trap your king. Instead, they take a highly valuable piece, maybe a knight or even their queen, and they just leave it exposed in the middle of the board. And then they sit back, fold their hands, and wait.
Debate.
Exactly. They just wait for you to look at that exposed piece, get greedy, and convince yourself that they made a mistake. They want you to launch your attack.
And then what happens?
And the absolute second you commit your forces, you realize the exposed piece wasn't a mistake at all. It was the center of a meticulously constructed, mathematically perfect kill zone. You haven't outsmarted them. You have walked exactly where they needed you to be. That is Cayenne.
It is the weaponization of the enemy's own aggression. And what is so deeply satisfying about analyzing the Sasiya is how perfectly this lore translates into the actual tabletop mechanics of the game.
Oh, I love when the rules actually match the story.
Right. The source material outlines their specific Sept tenet, which is called Masters of Urban Warfare.
Let's break the mechanics of that down. If you were playing Sasiya on the tabletop, what does that actually do for you?
In practical terms, this rule grants a universal cover bonus to Sasiya infantry and vehicles against ranged attacks made from a distance. So if the enemy is far away, the Sasiya are inherently harder to hit, regardless of whether they are standing behind a wall or out in the open.
Which mathematically simulates their supreme discipline and positioning.
Yeah.
Like they just know how to use the terrain.
Exactly.
But put yourself in the shoes of the opponent playing against this.
Yeah.
What does that cover bonus actually force the enemy to do?
Well, it completely dictates the terms of engagement. If you are commanding an opposing army, you quickly realize that engaging the Sasiya in a long-range shootout is mathematically doomed.
You're just wasting ammo.
You are going to lose the war of attrition because their cover bonuses blunt your firepower, while their return fire remains devastatingly accurate. You can bombard them from across the board all day, but you aren't going to break their lines.
So your hand is completely forced. If you can't shoot them off the objective from a distance, you only have one option left.
You have to walk toward them.
You have to close the gap.
You have to step into the kill zone. By making themselves incredibly resilient to distant attacks, they engineer a scenario where the enemy has absolutely no choice but to make aggressive, impetuous, desperate charges. They force the enemy to act exactly how the Sasiya have spent their entire lives training to counter.
It is psychological torture for the opposing commander.
It really is.
You know you're walking into an ambush. You can practically see the overlapping fields of fire. but their defensive posture is so flawless that they give you no other option. You have to charge the breakwater. You have to charge the immovable object.
And this is where their mastery of defensive fire comes into play. The Sasia build their armies around vast numbers of disciplined fire warriors and pathfinders. They hold key tactical positions, and as the enemy is forced to cross that open ground, the Sasia unleash a relentless, calculated storm of ranged fire.
We have to mention marker lights here,
Oh, definitely.
because this is where the cold, calculating nature of the Tau really shines. A Pathfinder doesn't just, aim a laser pointer. They are painting a target with a networked targeting designator that instantly feeds environmental data, trajectory math, and armor weaknesses to every single fire warrior on the grid.
It's all connected.
When a Sasia strike team opens fire, it isn't suppressive fire, it isn't spray and pray, it is an algorithmic dismantling of the advancing enemy line.
Which brings us to the visual reality of that firing line.
Yeah.
Because an army's aesthetic, its visual identity is rarely an accident.
Right.
It is almost always a reflection of its psychological warfare tactics. And the Sasia wear their doctrine on their sleeves, literally.
The sources are very specific about the Sasaballers. Their armor is predominantly blue-gray, accented with bright, stark orange Sept markings. Now, I want to really tear into this, because half of this color scheme is brilliant, and the other half seems like a suicidal tactical blunder.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's look at the blue-gray first. That makes total sense to me.
Sure.
If your entire doctrine is built around mastering urban warfare, hiding in blasted concrete ruins, and fighting in the shadows of domed cities, blue-gray is the ultimate urban camouflage.
It is highly pragmatic. The text notes that the blue-gray represents a cold, efficient resolve. It is the color of stone, of plascrete, of the unyielding foundation. It perfectly mirrors their stoic nature and allows them to seamlessly blend into the rubble of a shattered hive city.
Yes, perfect camouflage. I love it.
But then,
Here it comes. Then they take bright neon orange paint and they draw high visibility lines all over their helmets and chest plates. I mean, I have to call this out.
it sounds contradictory.
It sounds insane. If you are an army based entirely on defense, on extreme patience, on waiting quietly in cover for the enemy to stumble into your trap, why on earth would you paint bright orange targets on your own center of mass?
I get why you'd think that.
It completely defeats the purpose of the blue-gray camouflage.
Yeah.
You are hiding in the shadows, but you are wearing a high-visibility construction vest. If you are a sniper waiting in a ruined building, neon orange doesn't make you deadly, it makes you dead. It makes absolutely no tactical sense.
It makes no sense if you are thinking like a conventional human sniper who relies on remaining hidden to survive.
Well, yeah.
But you have to remember the core philosophy of Sasia. They don't hide because they are afraid. They hold positions because it is tactically superior. The orange is not a mistake. It is a deeply calculated psychological weapon.
Okay, explain to me how painting a target on your face is a weapon.
It is intimidation through visibility. Think of a poison dart frog in the jungle. It doesn't use camouflage. It uses bright, glaring colors to broadcast a very specific message to predators. I am right here. I am not hiding from you, and if you touch me, you will die. The Sasia use the exact same biological concept.
Warning coloration.
Exactly. When an advancing enemy force pushes into a ruined city block, the Sasia want them to see the orange in the rubble. It broadcasts to the opposing force exactly who they are facing. It says, "We are the Sasia. We have chosen this ground. We have mapped every inch of this street. We are not hiding, and we are not going to move."
Man, it's sheer arrogance, but backed up by perfect discipline.
It removes the enemy's hope. If an Imperial Guard regiment charges a ruin and takes fire from the shadows, they might hope they're just dealing with a few disorganized stragglers.
Right, they might think they can push through it.
But when they see that stark orange marking standing perfectly still in the crossfire, it shatters that hope. It tells them that they haven't stumbled into a skirmish. They have walked into a perfectly executed trap, and it is already too late to back out. The orange is the visual manifestation of inevitability.
Come and get it. That is so incredibly bold. I am standing right here in the open window. I have my pulse rifle pointed at your chest, and I am not going to flinch.
Yeah.
When you pull all of these elements together, their traumatic origin on a monster-filled death world, the hyperclaustrophobia of their dome cities, their endless subterranean combat simulations, the mathematical patience of the Cayenne Doctrine, and this stark poison frog aesthetic, you arrive at the core thesis of our deep dive today. You understand the ultimate horror of Sasia.
The lore makes a very specific point to contrast the Sasia with the typical horrors you expect to face in the 41st millennium. And it's a vital distinction to make.
Because it's the difference between fighting a wild animal and fighting a glacier.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it.
Think about it. If you were an Imperial Guardsman and a Khorne berserker comes screaming out of the warp at you swinging an axe, it is terrifying, viscerally terrifying. But a berserker is driven by rage, and rage is an emotion.
Emotions can be exploited.
Exactly. A wild animal can be scared off. A zealot can get tired, they can overextend, they can make a mistake born of pure fury. You can outmaneuver rage. But fighting the Sasia is like trying to fight a mathematical equation.
You cannot intimidate an algorithm.
And you cannot scare a wall.
That is the chilling, tactical reality of fighting them. Let's look at what trading lives for time actually means to this Sept. Imagine that imperial opposing force pushing into the city block. They are throwing everything at the Tau lines. Orbital bombardments, screaming mass infantry charges, maybe even psychic terrors.
Just a wall of noise and violence.
And the Sasia soldiers holding that barricade simply do not break. They are taking casualties, the math demands it, but they are trading those lives for time, denying the enemy ground inch by inch without ever giving in to the panic.
And the part that truly gets under my skin about all this lore is how quiet it is.
The silence of it.
Yeah. In the lore of this universe, last stands are always like super dramatic. People are screaming oaths to the Emperor, roaring defiance, engaging in wild, desperate melee combat as the lines collapse.
Very cinematic.
But the Sasia don't do that. There are no dramatic speeches. There is no wild flailing. It is just cold, calculated, overlapping defensive fire until the very last fire warrior falls. And by the time that final soldier is dead, they have ensured that the enemy paid an absolutely astronomical price in blood for a few useless feet of shattered concrete.
Which brings us to a profound philosophical point that the sources raise about the true nature of fear in warfare.
What's that?
The most dangerous enemy on a battlefield is not the one who screams and charges. The screaming enemy is predictable. They are telegraphing their intent. The most dangerous enemy is the one who watches, calculates the vectors, and holds the line with a quiet, unshakable certainty.
Because how do you defeat an opponent who has already mathematically calculated the cost of their own deaths?
You really can't.
If you are a Sasia Pathfinder, and the Markolite data tells you that for the trap to work, your squad has an 87% chance of being annihilated by incoming fire, you don't panic. You accept that percentage as a necessary variable for the strategic victory of the broader cadre.
It's just math to them.
You feel completely content with that outcome because it serves the greater good. How do you break the morale of an army when their morale isn't based on surviving? It's based entirely on executing the plan perfectly.
You can't. It is the horror of inevitability. When you fight the Sasia, you aren't fighting individuals who harbor a desperate human desire to survive and go home to their families.
Right.
You are fighting a unified biological mechanism designed to grind you down through sheer, unyielding attrition and perfect discipline.
It is a machine made of flesh and plasma. Okay, let's take a deep breath and recap the massive journey we've just been on.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We really did. We started in a hostile death world, completely overrun by flesh-eating predators, a crucible where an entire civilization was forced to either become perfectly disciplined or face immediate extinction.
And we saw how that generational trauma birthed a subterranean, hyper-optimized submarine culture of dome cities, where every citizen finds their highest joy in fulfilling their duty to the machine.
We explored how that dense, claustrophobic urban environment created an infantry caste uniquely suited for the absolute worst kind of warfare, which is close-quarters city fighting.
We discussed how they train endlessly in simulated alien metropolises, literally turning the chaos of urban combat into a solved equation.
And we unpacked the tabletop and lore mechanics of the Koyan doctrine, the patient hunter, where they use their own unshakable presence, highlighted by that glaring orange armor we talked about, as bait to draw aggressive enemies into mathematically perfect kill zones.
They are the unmovable object, the stoic guardians standing in the rubble.
But as we wrap up this deep dive into the 41st millennium, there is one final lingering thought that I want to leave you with, a question that extrapolates everything we've learned today about this utterly fascinating culture.
And it's a big one.
If an entire society is completely forged by the brutal necessity of survival, if their highest virtue, their architecture, and their very cultural DNA is entirely built around the cold, calculated trading of lies to hold a defensive line, what happens to the citizens of Sasia if the Tell Empire ever actually wins? What happens if they achieve absolute peace?
Right. Can a culture built perfectly from the ground up to execute the patient hunt, can they ever truly stop hunting?
Or would the absolute peace they're fighting for actually be the one environment they're completely psychologically unequipped to survive in? It makes you wonder if the breakwater needs the tidal wave just to have a purpose.
A deeply provocative thought for you to ponder.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Sept. Keep asking the hard questions, keep looking past the loud distractions on the battlefield, and we'll see you next time.